The U.S. has for the first time acknowledged that its ongoing airstrike campaign does not follow the military's previous rules on minimizing civilian casualties. National Security Council spokesperson Caitlin Hayden said that the strikes target areas of active hostilities, meaning that the so-called near-certainty standard on protecting civilians doesn't apply in this case. To discuss this more, I'm joined by Derek Monroe from Foreign Policy in Focus. Good to have you with us again on RT International.
Hi.
The White House saying that the same strict standards that it applies to its current airstrikes, drone strikes, things like that, are not going to be applied in the case of ISIS in Syria and Iraq. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think that the degree of outcry that is coming up from the deaths of the civilians, specifically in the areas where original Nusra Front was from time to time aligned with FSA, the so-called freedom fighters in Syria. And now there's a big outcry over there because of over the civilians being killed, including women and children. So White House is being very proactive to sort of cover all the fronts as far as a response to the attacks and criticism from not only from the region but also from the West. Because at the end of the day, you see a lot of hypocrisies taking place. And there's no such thing as a precision strike or surgical strike. There are always going to be human victims of any kind of situation, any kind of circumstance whatsoever, and the degree of our previous efforts to quote-unquote reduce our collateral damage is obviously not working. So this is going to be something that it's going to be going forward, and the White House is basically wants to buy itself some alibi or some time for the future strikes.
Now, the U.S. intelligence admits that it underestimated the initial threat of the scale of ISIS. At this point, does it seem, though, that the intelligence has caught up to the point that airstrikes and further action against ISIS can be effective, or are there still gaps in intelligence that might lead to the necessity for the possibility of mistakes, rather?
Well, I think the problem is within administration, there are a lot of different there are a lot of different PowerPoints, which are obviously taking a lot of heat or basically try to cover up their own behinds as far as the lack of analysis, the lack of actionable intelligence. So I think this is the first thing which have to be kind of emphasized about. Second of all, I think the degree of lack of information on the ground also reflects the degree of our, I think, blindness, to be honest, to weigh how we are actually evaluating the threats, how we evaluating the capabilities. Just look what happened at the Iraqi army. There were the $25 billion and up were spent, and there was supposed to be a viable fighting force, and how quickly that disappeared. So you have to realize just from the issues, not only from the external foreign policy, but also internal Pentagon games and Pentagon political struggles which are taking place. Because at the end of the day, White House definitely would like to see some accountability, not necessarily on the ground in Iraq and Syria, but also within its own echelons of power and Pentagon.
What kind of effect do you think the airstrikes are having on the civilian populations in Syria and Iraq where ISIS is operating?
Well, it is a double-edged sword, because there's no denying that attacks were widely accepted and also welcomed by people who are suffering under IS rule in Syria and northern Iraq. So there's definitely some positive movement as far as the people getting galvanized, getting at least emotional and material support for fighting against IS. However, you know, it cannot be underestimated also the degree of harm that is really being done to people who are being innocently killed. So I think there's really a rather tragic double-edged sword which is taking place right now. And you really cannot speak for the victims' families and victims. Just the best you can do is just offer them sympathy, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of innocent people going to be actually getting hurt one way or the other. So there's really, I think, no good solution here.
Now, on that same line, we've got reports that up to 12 civilians have been killed in a recent Tomahawk missile strike. Why haven't we heard much from the international community about this collateral damage?
Well, I think, as you can probably tell from the coverage on international media, especially U.S. media, I think population here, coming from the U.S. vantage point, is really kind of kept in the dark exactly about what's really taking place. Specifically, first of all, there's really no access for foreign journalists being on the ground in Syria and IS-controlled areas, which is understandable why there are no journalists there. And second of all, I think there's also the degree of kind of everybody falling into line behind the White House, specifically with their policy to to basic fight against terrorism in Syria and northern Iraq. So I think there are just a lot of different agendas which are being played here, and there's very little reference, I think, as far as the getting the real actionable information on the ground at this point. So I think that's something that it's, I would say, perfect storm of different circumstances which kind of comes in together. That's why we're really not getting really good information out of Syria right now.
All right, Derek Monroe, Foreign Policy in Focus. Thanks again for your time.